What's up? Adam here from Reactive Terrain. So as I promised, I was going to do you a video on how to get the 1/16 WPL winch to work with the version 2 scx24 receiver and transmitter. But first, I better clear my desk up. Maybe a little bit. Okay. All right, so that's a bit better. We can actually see a little bit of the workspace. So what you're going to need is a stock servo, just an old servo that you've probably got lying around. You're going to want a WPL 1/16 winch. Amazon, these range anything from about 16 to 18 pound. They're not very expensive whatsoever. However, you do have to solder the motor and build the kit, but it's very straightforward. You're going to need your version 2, a battery with a bit of life in it. You're going to need your handset to basically calibrate it all to channel 3. Tool wise, you're not going to need a busting lot. You're going to need a real small Phillips posi head to take apart the servo. You're going to need a pair of wire cutters to snip the wires, a couple of 1mm heat shrinks. I normally use a hairdryer to kind of shrink them down, and you're going to need a soldering iron, preferably one with a dial that you can kind of adjust. For this work, I normally do on a 3. Just helps keep the circuitry soldering just under control. Okay, so just before we kind of open up the winch, I'm just using regular soldering flux, nothing special there, and I'm just using a 1mm solder. Right, so the WPL winch, like I say, this is relatively affordable on the interweb. Good old Amazon. Got you. All right, there's a lot of bits in this one, so let's get to these parts. Now, this one here, if I can kind of zoom in. So these are your little runners for your cable. These go in between the things. You have your outer casing and backing plate. You've got your length of wire attached to your motor. You got your motor, little reducer gearbox on it as well. If you've been watching our Wrecker games, you'll know that my winch is a lot slower compared to G-Dog's, but it's I still really like it. I know it is a little slow, but in here is a lot of little bits and bobs to kind of dress up your winch once you've done it. There's also the reel, the backing plates for the reels, and all the components, but we'll put them together in a minute. You get your line, which you can't see because the sun's reflecting off it. There we go. Get your line for your winch. There is a hook inside this other bag, and then the good old manual, but we don't need that. Right. In the building trade, we have a tendency just to throw manuals away, and then you have to figure it out for yourself. It's good fun until you have to take everything apart. Right, now I'm not going to trim any of these cables down because this is only going to show you how to do it. I'm not even sure what I'm using it for, so I don't want to cut too much excess off any cabling until I figure out kind of what I'm about to do. I'm literally about to kind of shorten all the electronics in my Wrecker. This is the winch that's out the Wrecker at the moment. You'll see I've left it all long while I was trialing it. You have your little servo box, which, to be fair, I think painted up, you could probably make it look like an ammo box. Pretty cool. Or, you know, a toolbox or something like that. And then your winch. Your next job is going to be stripping this down. Okay, so we're going to move all this lot away for now. And we're going to strip down the servo. Now this is where you're going to have to be really kind of gingerly about taking out the components from the servo, because on first initial go you will find that a lot of it feels quite rigid and quite stiff. Okay, they've also normally, last two I've done, have this kind of glue, this kind of silicone kind of dotted around. So yeah, we do have to do this relatively smooth. So because I'm a guitarist, got nice big thick fingernails, you want to run your fingernail or a small screwdriver around the rim and remove the top plate of the servo. You're not going to need any of these gears. I'll get rid of all of them. Okay, and then you're just going to give everything a little poke and a push, and that's the motor released, I think. Yeah, there we go, come on, out you come. Right, that's the motor released. Okay, and now what we need to do is release the adjuster. Now this is your trim adjuster, and this is kind of vital to this build. Okay, so this is your trim adjuster for the servo, and this is what you need to be able to link it to your channel 3 on your version 2 for the scx24, because without this, if you just plug it straight in onto the channel 3, it's just going to constantly be drifting in and out, and you won't have no way of adjusting. So this you do not want to damage, you do not want to pull the cables off. So what you want to try and do is, normally what I'll do is I'll just get a pair of wire cutters and just grip this prong sticking out here and just give it a gentle push, and that literally is all it needs just to release this trim adjuster out. And this is what you're left with. Now the motor is what we're going to be detaching from, and we need this circuit board and we need this trim adjuster to get it all to work. Alright, so we're taking a little closer look at the circuit board. Now what we're going to be doing is, I'm not going to be able to do this on camera because it is very small. I have very big fingers, so I will have to desolder this off camera. Purely because you've got to get yourself in a bit of a weird position. You've got to make sure that you're not getting too much heat through this, because you don't want the heat to travel too much through here. Hence why, ideally, if you've got a soldering iron that you can turn down the heat, you can do it nice and gradual. But really what you're trying to do is you want to detach your motor from your circuit board nice and gently and nice and easy. Now, if you didn't feel confident enough in desoldering this, you could simply get a pair of wire cutters and cut it off. So, you know, you literally just get your pair of wire cutters, get nice and close to the bit of solder, and just cut and then you can just literally just snip it off. Okay, so you don't have to fire up a soldering iron for this part. You can just do it with a pair of wire cutters and cut the cables off. And there we go, that's the wire detached from the circuit board, and we're just left with the trim adjuster and this small little circuit board. Okay, now the motor, well, if you want to use it for something, I kept mine. You never know, you might need a tiny little motor for something. So, you know, always keep these things. Alright, now the next step is to solder the two cables on to the motor of the winch. Okay, so here's the motor and the torque box on it, and you'll see on the back it has a nice positive sign. That is where your red cable will get soldered onto, and your black cable will get soldered next to it. It's already come with some solder on the wire itself, but I'm just going to basically prep a little bit of solder on these tabs, just so that once I get the heat in the right place, these guys will just get onto it nice and easy. I'm going to put a little bit of flux. Now, I recommend using a paintbrush to kind of add the flux to the area instead of having a big dollop of it everywhere. And again, I'm going to have to solder this off camera, because trying to do it looking like this through the camera is quite off-putting, I have to say, and it's quite fiddly, you know, trying to get a big old soldering iron in the picture as well. Can't even see it. Hold on, there it, you know, it's huge. I'm gonna end up burning myself. So let me get these soldered on, and we will then proceed to the next step. So there we go. That's the red and black cable added. Nice, quick and simple. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to plug it straight into position 3 on the receiver. There's the battery added. There's the handset on. The lights, camera, action. And sure enough, let me just show you. You get nothing from it. Nothing whatsoever. And this got me scratching my head for a little while, and then I kind of had a bit of an epiphany of an old thing I used to do with other servos back in the day, and I did that, and this is kind of what it did. Now you could, just to double check that your motor is wired up properly and everything's cool, you could just run a couple of lines to it just to check with a battery. I'm not going to do that because I know what the problem is. Now what we've got to do is we've got to wire these red and black wires into the positive and negative. Now remember, if you don't have a very good memory, always take a picture before you start cutting things off of anything. Make sure that you make a note of what line went where. However, it's not really going to be that important here because it is just a motor line. It simply will have to just either reverse or not reverse. It's as simple as that. So you can't really go wrong. However, if you did want to make sure that it was all absolutely spot on, take a picture, make a note, and then your positive and your negative. Okay, right. Again, I'm going to have to try and do this off camera because this bit is quite fiddly. You really don't want to get too much heat, and you want to have nice, clean cables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this off, clean up the cable lines, pre-solder these. So we're going to put some solder on the wires so they're already loaded, so that as soon as they kind of make contact and you've got a bit of heat, they solder straight on. What we're going to do is we're going to cut these connectors off, and then we're just going to bare the wire a little bit and pre-solder it. I'm going to back the camera up because it's just going to keep focusing on my hand and nobody wants to see that. Okay, so I'll back the camera off a little bit now so that you can kind of see what we're doing instead of it constantly focusing on my hand. This is very little wire, so it does struggle focusing, but I'm just going to nip the ends off. And just bare a little bit of wire. There's probably about 4 mil of wire there. I'm going to twist it up, and I'm going to do the same with the black. Take your time in this bit because what you don't want to end up with is just 2 or 3 strands of cable. Okay, so take your time. Don't go trying to charge at it thinking you can just cut into it, because it will just pull a lot of cable out, and you don't want to do that. Now the other thing I'm going to be doing is taking a bit of heat shrink and prepping the heat shrink over the top of the black and the red for this part, and again for the red, because if once I need to shorten it down, I will actually desolder it from the motor side of it and shorten it that way rather than shorten it from the tricky side. Okay, so quick tip: best way to preload a piece of wire with some solder is get a little bit of flux on it. Okay, get a little bit of flux on it like this. Solder on your soldering iron. Get a little bit more than that. That's cool. Okay, and all we're going to do is gently and just put it onto the blob of solder with the flux, and it will just seep into the cable. Let me show you. I'll show you one more time with the black. Okay, so I've just loaded it up with a bit of flux. Just going to get some solder. If it wants to play ball. Man, doing this one-handed is quite tricky. And then you just load it up with some solder. Okay. Right, the next stage, you're going to want to take a bit of time in and making sure you get it absolutely spot on. Because again, like I've said before, you don't want to get too much heat on this. So I would recommend doubling a little bit of flux on both terminals and then loading up your cable so that everything's ready. So the moment you get contact, it's going to create a bond straight away. Alright, just give them a little pull just to make sure that they are secure. Okay, so once your battery's connected, check for smoke or fire. You never know. No, it's okay. And straight away, as soon as I flicked on the, I don't know if you can hear this, you can start to see movement. So straight away, it's now moving. And when I flick the switch, I've got motion backwards and forwards, but in neutral, position neutral, it's still moving. And that is why we needed to keep this little gizmo on board. Okay, right. So now when you took the servo apart, you would have had this little thing right here. And what this does is enable you to adjust it. And what you're going to be doing is adjusting it until it stops. Okay. Okay, just there we go. So there's no more movement left on it. If I twist it back again, you can see everything's moving. Okay, let me just try. I know there's a lot of wires. Like I say, I haven't trimmed my wires on this one yet. Just see the cogs moving. Oh. And then it's and it stops. And okay, now what it's doing again with this one, it's started in the neutral, it's moving again. So you're going to get this and set it to neutral again. This is probably the worst bit of doing this, because you've got to try and get it. So you have to keep playing with it until you find the neutral position on the trim. Once again, you want to go to your transmitter, give it a couple of flicks, and then when you set it into neutral, you'll find that it will then go again. And you're going to have to kind of keep working at this until you don't get any more movement when you finish toggling it. Okay, so I managed to get it stopped again. And there we go. Now this is where a bit of patience comes in handy, because it's a little fiddly. So what I like to do now is, this is personal preference of how you glue this. Now personally, I would always recommend heat glue gun in it, because if you use heat glue and you don't quite get it right, you can pick it apart and pick it off and try it again. If you use super glue, you're kind of stuffed. Okay, so use a bit of hot glue, and we're going to hot glue this into place so that this doesn't move. What I want to use as a little box is the old casing for the servo, and this little thing here just pulls off nice and simple. And you're going to want to use the base plate. Little box. We're going to put some heat glue in there, and then that will keep that nice and secure and watertight as well, because if you don't know this channel already, we do like to get very wet and very muddy. So this makes for a nice little waterproof box once I've sealed it all with heat glue. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a bit of heat glue now, and we're going to put a dollop of heat glue right on this other side of the sensor. So you've got this side here, and you've got the other side. Okay, now making sure that this is not moving, you're going to want a quick check on your channels to make sure it's backwards or forwards. See, mine, as soon as I put it into neutral, started spinning again. So always double checking. Just going to adjust it up. Okay, so I've got it to stop again by just gently adjusting it. Told you, patience is definitely the key to these. All right, that's now backwards and forwards, and it doesn't move when it's in neutral. So what we're going to do now is just add a tiny little bit of heat glue into this to stop it from moving anymore. And that's all you're going to need is a nice clean little double on there. Take your finger, give it a little lick, and just pat it down nice and gently. Okay. And that should now hold itself in position. Reason why we do it on this side first and not this side is that if you do need to adjust it, you can pull this off without pulling this little disc off. Go back in quite easy, but even still, do it on this side. That way, if you test it and this moves, you can just pick that little bit off, readjust it, and do the process again. So again, back to the test. Yeah, we're good. So that's in neutral. That's all ready to rock and roll. That's now working on channel 3 on the V2. So now all we need to do is get this little kitty all nice and secured and heat glued into position. And we're going to be doing that with the old servo casing. Now it does have its own positioning, and you can see there's a couple of little tabs where this originally goes. You're going to want to get that back into that position. Okay, so you've got a cutout on this lid already. What you want to do is put another one this side. You use a file or a pair of snips or anything just to put another slot in here, and that's basically to be able to make sure that the cables can come out left and right. You can do it in the other base, it doesn't really matter, whichever way is easy for you. I'm actually just going to use a little file just to kind of make a replica of the other one on the other side. Okay, so now you've got 1 and 2. Now this is quite fiddly. You're going to want to be nice and gentle with this. Now normally what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it in position. just make sure that all the cables fit without being crimped, and make sure that the box seals up nice and easy. It looks like we're there. We've got good seal all the way around. I'm really happy with the way that is. So now that I've tested it, I'm just going to take it back off, and I'm basically going to fill this up with heat glue. Okay, and we're going to repeat the same process again, making sure all the cables are all nice and tucked away. Now you do have to be relatively quick at this stage because the heat glue obviously will set. Squeeze it down. Now, if you'd notice, what the whole time I've got this plugged in, I've got this all on, because that way, the moment this decides it wants to play up, I'm not saying it will, but you'll hear it, you'll see it, and you can just stop what you're doing. The reason why I don't heat glue gun the green section in is if I do need to adjust this, when I crack this open, the heat glue will actually be to the little circuit board and not this green bit. Now underneath, you'll see that there is a few lines that underneath you'll see that there is loads of little holes. Best way to deal with this is to just take a snip, get rid of all these little bits, or file and just file them all flush, and just put a little tiny bit of heat glue in all the holes. Okay, and that's it. That's all you really need to do. I say that's it. To some people, they're just like, no, that's too tricky. But actually, you can't really go wrong with the cabling because it's motor based. Black or red, red or black. All it does is reverse the polarity of the motor. So you can't really wire it up too wrong. The only thing that really is quite tricky is the cabling and the sections that we're soldering to are really small. So when you've got big builder hands like me, can get a little tricky. The other thing is having enough patience to get that trim absolutely spot on to stop that from moving. This one actually was a little bit trickier than the first one. The first one I managed to do quite quickly. This one took me a couple of attempts. When I thought I had it, I didn't quite have it. I went to glue it and it started moving again. But like I said, glue the other side with a little tiny black dot, and that way you just pick it off, readjust it, put some more heat glue on it. Job done. And we've got a working winch. Not that you can see it very well. You can see it moving. Yeah. And when it's in neutral, it's stopped. So that is how you get a winch working on your version 2 SCX controller and receiver. It is a little fiddly, but it's definitely worth doing it, because then you can get involved in the wrecker games. I hope this video has been helpful. I've tried to do it as close up and as possible. It's really tricky with this fine stuff to try and be able to work on it and keep the video on it. So the next stage really is down to you. Putting all your little bits and bobs together, fitting up the winch with all its little accessories, and mounting it to the body, the bumper. At the moment, my wrecker, I've mounted it to the rear, and I've got a funky little A-frame. There is a video if you guys want to check that out. And yeah, hopefully that should get you guys up and running with a kind of scaled, it's the smallest kind of winch there's out there at the moment. I think there is a 1/24th, but it's big money. And I did this for, well, it's 16 to 18 pound for the winch, and the servos, most of us have already upgraded a servo at one point, so we've probably got plenty of stock ones lying around, or you could just buy yourself a cheap and cheerful servo and use that to do it, and they're just a few quid as well. Putting a winch on your scx24 wrecker, or rock crawler, or trail truck, or whatever you're building. pull a winch on it. So if this is something you guys have really enjoyed, then please subscribe, please hit the like button and the notification bell, and I'll see you next time.